On today's episode of Boundary Breakers, we sit down with entrepreneur Liz Elting. Liz started a business in her dorm room in 1992 and grew the business into what is now over $1 billion business. She's won every award that I think that you can win as an entrepreneur. She has a refreshingly honest, transparent, and open style that provides a really interesting look behind the curtain of what the journey is like, what the entrepreneurial journey is like to go from a dorm room to $1 billion business. I think you're going to love this episode. Boundary Breakers is brought to you by Carter & Clark. Liz, why don't you tell us a little bit about your origin story, sort of where you grew up and your background?
Sure, absolutely. So thank you for asking, Brandon. So basically, I was very fortunate because I was born in New York, in Westchester, and I lived there till I was 8. But then when I was 8, I had the opportunity to move to Portugal. And we did that because my dad he had been first in marketing, then in advertising, and he got the right to open Kentucky Fried Chicken in Portugal. He got the KFC franchise. And he thought, wow, that sounds great, because he loved all things international and he was very entrepreneurial. So we moved over to Portugal. Shortly after we moved there, the Portuguese Communist Revolution broke out, and they were very anti-American, anti-capitalism, and it became quite dangerous. Our mail was being opened, our phones were being tapped, and there were demonstrations going on outside our home, and people thought he worked for the CIA because that's who the Americans that were over there at the time tended to be. So anyway, we had to leave after less than a year, and then moved back to New York for a year. And then when I was 10, we moved to Canada, to Toronto. And that was another way for my dad to do something international, but less risky, less dangerous.
Wow.
And so we did that. And what was wonderful about living first in the US and then in Portugal and then in Canada is I was able to study 4 languages by the time I had graduated from high school. So I studied Spanish, French, Portuguese, and Latin. So It was wonderful. And realized by the time I was 17 and I had graduated from high school that I loved languages. Majored in languages in college, did a year in Spain, junior year in Spain, Cordoba, Spain, and then worked in Venezuela after college, and then came to New York City, Manhattan, where I still live today. And that's really, that was my background growing up. But my parents, as I said, they loved all things that were international, and they were entrepreneurial, and it was just a wonderful way to grow up.
Wow.
And the other thing I'll say is they taught me those values, but they also taught me to be financially independent, to depend on no one financially except myself. And as a result, I worked from a very young age. I worked from the time I was 10 on, and I had all kinds of jobs, everything from walking a child to school to babysitting to newspaper delivery. And then it went on and on and on as I got older and I could legally get a paycheck. But I mean, that's how I was brought up. And it was wonderful. And
I love it.
Yeah. So that's my origin story.
No, I love it. So my wife, after college, lived in New York for 6 years, and we dated. I'm in Atlanta, and so we dated long distance. And so I spent many a day and night flying, in and out of LaGuardia, and staying down in Soho where her apartment was. So I've got very fond memories of Manhattan and New York. But I hear it's changed a lot since the COVID. But hopefully things are coming back a little bit.
Oh my gosh, things are coming back. It's crazy. All these people everywhere, super crowded, so much action. Yeah, it's the New York I know and love.
That's fantastic. That's great to hear. Well, so it sounds like your father was sort of the classic entrepreneur, and did he pass those genes down? Was it a very natural thing? You started working when you were 10. Is being an entrepreneur and sort of the entrepreneurial spirit, has that always been sort of part of who you are since back then?
And as I said, I was really taught to make my own money, and I had to start paying for things on my own quite early. I mean, when I was 16, I stopped getting any kind of allowance, and I started needing to pay for all my clothes and all of my activities. And so it was good. But entrepreneurial, yes, because as a result of that, I needed to find all kinds of jobs.
Yeah.
And I did. And I loved working. I learned a lot, and I loved being financially independent. And yes, I am very grateful to my dad and my parents really for teaching me those values. My mom worked her whole career until she was 78 years old. So
Wow.
yeah, my parents
Wow.
taught me the value of hard work, and I'm so grateful to them for that.
Well, that's amazing. It's amazing that you learned all of those different languages, even with the travel that your family did. Just being able to process that many different languages is extremely impressive. And so, take us back to your dorm room in NYU in 1992 when you first kind of started thinking about this business opportunity that you were going to start.
Sure, I will. And I will say, yes, maybe languages were my thing, but there were many things that were not my thing. And I talk about this, and I tell a little story about this in my book, which is I was a terrible singer. I was not a great athlete for those team sports in high school. So I had to be decent at something. But yeah, there are so many things I wasn't good at. But anyway, so back to the dorm room question. So after I came to move to New York when I was 21, I got a job actually at a translation company. And this is before the dorm room. I'm just giving a little background to that. Yeah, when I was 21, moved to New York City and found out about a translation company. And this was many, many years ago. It was in 1987. And I thought, wow, what a perfect place for me to work because I loved business and I loved languages. So I ended up getting a job there, and I worked there for 3 years. And first I was in production, and then I was in sales, and I really learned the industry. And I loved the industry, but I thought it could be done better. I saw a gap between what clients needed and what was available at that company that I was working at and in the industry as a whole. So then what happened is I went back to school. I got my MBA from NYU Business School, and actually very briefly tried out finance after graduating. I had majored in finance and international business at NYU, and I did that because I thought, well, I've tried out this language thing, but now I've got to be at the other company that I was working at. But I've got to be practical, and I need to make sure I can make my own money, and finance is a good route toward that. So I got a job at the proprietary trading division of a French bank. And I thought, okay, I'm combining finance with my love for that which is international, the French bank. Started off, and after only 4 weeks, realized, oh my goodness, I had made a huge mistake. Two things. One is it was a very sexist environment. This was in 1992. But the second reason was it was nothing like the language industry. It was, to me, very dry. A lot of number crunching and paper pushing. And I just thought, I don't see working here in my job or in my boss's job or in the person who owns the place job. So I thought, okay. So after only 4 weeks, I gave notice, 2 weeks notice, and I left after 6 weeks and started the company and TransPerfect. And you asked about that was out of the NYU Business School dorm room. And the reason I did it was because, as I said, I loved the language industry, but thought it could be done better. Did not care for a career in finance. And I thought, if not now, when? I was 26 years old. I was used to living like a student. I was young and broke and not having a lot of money because I had recently gotten my MBA. And I thought, if not now, when? I'll do it.
I love it. Well, so let's talk a little bit about the translation company that you worked for previously. Just make sure that for the benefit of the audience and for myself. So, was this mostly transcription services, or was this mostly like real time translating, like you sort of see at the UN, or what type of services did they offer?
What it was, for example, if a client, a big company, had an annual report that they needed translated into 30 languages, if IBM had an annual report, and it was doing everything from translating into those languages to typesetting That's what they called it back then. I mean, now
Right.
it's desktop publishing. But
Yep.
basically, creating that annual report in 30 or 50 or 100 different languages, if that's what they
Gotcha.
need. We did a lot of work for, big companies who were doing international business.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
document translation and other language services.
Gotcha. No, that helps. That helps. And so you mentioned that there were some weaknesses or maybe some things that you realized early on when working for the other translating company that maybe jumped out or that you noticed. What I'm
Yes.
curious. What were they doing that they weren't doing
Great
correctly?
question. Yes. So one thing was, because first I had been in production and then in sales, and a client would say, okay, I have a 10-page document that I need translated from English into Spanish. How long will it take? And I would need to tell them 5 to 7 days, like a week, a business week. And they said, but, I really would like it sooner. And I knew it could be done faster. I had been on the production side, but that was just not something I could offer. I thought, well, that's crazy. I mean, business moves fast. We need to be able to do this faster. Another thing was, we back then were working in only a couple softwares. The two big softwares back then were WordPerfect and Microsoft Word. And that was basically how we delivered the jobs. But they might need something in PowerPoint or whatever software, or they might need something altogether different related to a language or another service altogether. And I couldn't offer them that. Or they would ask for a quote. And then I, as a salesperson, would have to go back to production and say, how much will it cost to get this done? And I thought after a while, it became clear how much it would cost. And yet I had to wait a few days for production to get back to me so I could get back to the client. And then finally, I thought, these clients are all over the world. They need an office, and all over the U.S. They could use an office right near them in their backyard, in their city. So we need to have a global presence. So those are some examples. And then last thing, because I saw a lot of things.
Yeah.
To me, what you can learn when you work at someone else's company in the industry, you can find all the flaws and think, wow, I would do that differently. And last thing is, if we made a mistake on a project, a qualitative error, that client would call up and say, we found some mistakes. Can you please fix them? And I said, sure, absolutely. And then I would need to charge the client to fix them. And I thought, that's not right. These are objective mistakes. That's not client service. So those are some examples. And so right off the bat, I thought, globalization is happening. This was in the early 90s. And this can be done, that I started the company, and this can be done better.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's fascinating. So, all right, so take us back there. So it's early 90s.
Yep.
You've identified, well, you have decided, I think maybe that, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that you can do it better.
Yeah.
And so take us there. Were you nervous to start this venture? Were you anxious? Were you concerned? Or have you just been confident from the very beginning that you could build a major business starting with this,
No, I was
from
very
scratch?
nervous. I was very nervous. And at the time, when I did the research, because I did some quick research after having this idea, that I found out there were 10,000 translation companies out there at that time.
Wow.
It was a very fragmented industry, very mom and pop-ish, typically with between 2 and 5 people. So, the one I was at was about 90 people. It was actually the world's largest, the one that I had worked at before business.
Okay.
But I thought, no, this is not going to be easy. There's competition out there where we would not be the first people to do this. But I thought, but if we are going to do it, we're going to do it better. And we're going to work harder, and we're going to do what others won't, show up what others don't, and we're going to innovate, and we're going to spoil the client with service. So I kind of made that commitment to myself, but I was definitely scared. I was completely motivated by fear, because when I told people what I was doing, they were like, yeah, good luck with that.
Really?
Whether it was people in business school who had their jobs at the big companies that everyone wanted, American Express, Goldman Sachs, that's where people from Stern, NYU went. And it was a risk. And I think my my parents were worried that I wasn't going to be able to make any money. And so it was a risk, but I thought, I'm going to go for it and I'm going to prove everybody wrong.
I love it. I love it. So from the beginning, this wasn't just something that you sort of ended up turning into a business, but from the beginning, you were determined did you want to build the world's largest translation company? Was that sort of in the business plan from day one?
Pretty early on, because, as I said, there was competition. And I thought, if we're going to do this, we need to be the biggest and the best. So that was the goal from very early on. I can't.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, the very first goal was to make sure we could pay the bills and be financially independent. Right. But then, once we got to that point, it's like, okay, we can hopefully take this to the top. And I'm a big believer that, and I think it's known that the first $1 million in revenue is by far the toughest. Yeah. And it was. Getting from 0 to $1 million was 1,000,000 times harder than getting from $1 million to over 600 million. And, now the company is doing over 1.2 billion. But yes, I mean, that I think, yeah, I mean, but yes, shortly after getting to $1 million, then it seemed feasible.
Yeah. Well, that's incredible. It makes it, honestly, it makes it even more impressive when you realizing that you set out from the very beginning to do what has actually been accomplished. Because as you know, so many businesses end up pivoting or being sort of an accident. Like, I was doing this on the side, and not taking anything away from any of those companies, but it's a whole lot harder to say, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to achieve this goal, and actually do exactly what you say you're going to do from the beginning. But I want to sort of, put a microscope on this little part of your life, if you don't mind, because so many entrepreneurs, or so many budding entrepreneurs, they might, maybe they're working in finance, right? Or they're working in this other career, and they feel like they want to become an entrepreneur and they want to start a business, and maybe they even have an idea. But I've heard so many people say, well, look, I just don't know sort of like where to start. I don't know what that first step is to do. Like, do I do a business plan? Can you look back? Do you remember when you had nothing? How did you, what was the first couple of steps that you took?
Oh, yeah, I do. And I did not do a business plan. We did not do a business plan. As I mentioned, I had firsthand experience in the industry. And then what I did, once I quit that other job and realized, wow, I got to do something fast because I didn't have money. I needed to make money. I remembered the industry very well. I reached out to translators that I had worked with at the other company and just, asked them what they thought of the idea. And I tried to find out how busy they were with business. Yeah. I thought that would be helpful. But I had an idea that it was growing. The industry was growing. It was really the beginning of the globalization of business. So there was room for it. So that was my competitive analysis. And then as far as a business plan, it was in my head. I had a plan on how we would do it. And, we can talk about what we did when we move on to that part of the conversation. But instead of focusing on putting together a business plan and a deck and pitching investors, instead focused on sales, revenue. And I say this now, funding is vanity, profitable revenue is sanity. Meaning it's all about the revenue and, of course, the profit from the revenue. And if you spend all your time on that business plan and getting investors and bringing in investors and you don't have the revenue, you're going to have some very unhappy investors and you're going to be unhappy and it's not going to work out. And those investors are not going to bring you the revenue. It's the execution. It's the hard work. So that's what I focused on from day one. And we focused on sales. Every day. And, I talk about this in my book, but basically making 300 phone calls a day to figure out who at a company would have a need for our service. And then once got the right name, sending them out a letter with information on us. And did this over and over and over every day for weeks and months and years. And that's how we grew the company. And having discipline to do that, to focus on revenue and knowing the only way we're going to pay our bills is profit through the revenue. And so that's what we needed to do. So I think that's so important. And I think that's what any, entrepreneur should do when they're starting. Focus on getting the business. Cash is king. The number one reason companies go out of business is they run out of cash. And that's where all your effort should be, bringing in the business. And then you bring it in and you figure out a way to get it done. And that's pretty much how that describes how we did it. I mean, in the early days, we didn't have a team. We didn't have a network of thousands of translators to help us get the work done, but we brought it in and then we figured out a way to get it done in the highest quality manner as quickly as possible. And that's what, high quality, fast turnaround time, but bring in that business every day, be committed to the goals and, do not take a break. I mean, take a break after you've finished your goals each day.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. No, I love that. Look, I'm not a fan of business plans either. Well, you didn't say you weren't a fan. You just said you didn't want, so I don't want to put words in your mouth.
I'm not. I'm a fan of sales, revenue, profit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I feel, me personally, in my experience with business, the amount of time that goes into those a business plan, by the time you're done with it, something has already changed, right? That's going to change the plan. So then what do you do? At that point, do you say, okay, now I don't need a business plan? If you're going to stick to having a business plan, then you got to go back and edit the business plan. It's just...
That's true.
I feel like, I'm not going to... The business plan is I think, maybe something that is used as a crutch or as a formality of business or generations past that may be helpful for some, but not for any of my experiences. But you mentioned something really interesting. So early on, you just pounded the phone calls, right? Once you figured out, it sounds like sort of once you figured out the who you needed to talk with, and the companies where they worked, that you were just extremely disciplined at just hammering sales, business development, trying to get revenue in the door. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And, in our case, we were pitching every company out there that could be doing international business. And it was all the Fortune 1000 companies, all of the banks, the law firms, the ad agencies, so there were so many companies to focus on. But of course, as you go on, you learn what companies and what departments within the companies have the need for your services. You learn by making the calls, by the action. So it's a case of just getting out there and doing it. And then you learn and you refine as you go along where you should focus. And, of course, now it would be, phone calls would be a bit of an anomaly. Now people don't talk on the phone the way they used to. But it would be the LinkedIn connections and messages, the emails, and, requiring yourself to do a certain number every single day and then refining what you say. And then the concept of getting in touch with the same person perhaps 6 to 8 times before getting that first project for them. Because I think a lot of first-time entrepreneurs or young people who are starting out in business, they don't know that. They think, I reached out, they weren't interested, so I'm done with that person. But that's, as we know, that's not how sales works. So it's really, that's really, really important, what we're talking about, just focusing on bringing that business. And in our case, it took thousands of letters, and thousands of phone calls and thousands of letters, tens of thousands maybe, to get that first project.
Uh-huh.
I remember the first project, the second project, the third project. I remember them like they were the most important phone call in the world. And I remember what happened with each of them. But the point is, then you get it, and they may be tiny, but you spoil the client with quality and service, so they come back for another project and another. And it's the repeat business and the referrals, and that's what turns into a multi-million-dollar relationship. So I think it's really important for entrepreneurs to know that it may take thousands or tens of thousands of connections, of emails, of messages,
contacts,
contacts to get that first one. But then action creates action, and then it can really grow exponentially after that.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. And I think you're touching on what I think is a critical point in business, and something that I found that is maybe misunderstood, maybe a good way to put it, with regard to sales. I see so many times where, whether a salesperson is doing well is judged based on, their results, right? Like how much they brought in, how many sales they have done, or how many new clients they have brought in. And oftentimes that may be a good indicator of the type of salesperson that they are. But what I believe you're saying, and what I'm a big believer in, is it's not necessarily trying to chase the results, but it is in measuring the actual known activities,
Yes.
the activities that are known or proven to bring in a client or a customer, depending upon your particular field, right? Whatever you may be selling, lollipops, I don't know, but what are the activities that in the past have led to successful, sales, and how many of those are you willing to do?
Yes.
Because at some point, if you got enough data, it's a math equation, right?
Yep.
If you make 100,000 phone calls, then on average, you're probably going to be looking at this. It sounds to me like you're a big believer in just staying disciplined with the activities that you knew were gonna create results. Is that right?
Oh, 150%. In fact, I remember it was probably after 10,000 phone calls. The very first call from a client came in, and I remember the project very well. It was a 3-page contract that was in English, and it needed to be translated into Slovak. And I remember,
Wow.
I just couldn't believe it. But, from a small law firm, not a huge law firm, but a small law firm. Well, later we dealt with all of the largest law firms in the world, every single one of them. But this was a small law firm, and they said 3 pages, English into Slovak. And I remember, and then when the project was ready, I called the client up and I said, okay, your project is ready. And it was on a floppy disk. That's what we used back then. And I said, we can messenger it on over to you or overnight mail it to you, because this was pre-email, pre-internet. And they said, oh, that's okay. I'll be in your neighborhood and I would love to stop by and check out the operation.
Oh.
The operation was the dorm room.
Yeah.
So they didn't know that. So I remember we made the time that she would be there, and I ran downstairs early to kind of keep her from passing the doorman. And I just said, great to meet you. Here is your project. And that was kind of crazy, but that was project number 1. And the thing that was so crazy, even crazier, is the second project was for a big publishing company called GMI, General Media International. Actually, they owned Penthouse magazine they owned a bunch of magazines, but that was one. But anyway, we did it because we thought, this is a translation project. We're going to do it. It was a business letter from the CEO to someone, and that heard a knock on the door. It was the client showing up to pick up the project. And I thought, how did this just happen? And boy, that was crazy, because somehow back then clients used to,
Right.
Everything was more in person back then.
Yep.
And so I was very excited to get out of that dorm room, which, to our point about the goals, stuck with the goals. And after 6 months, which was my goal, to move out of that dorm room into an office, we were able to move into our first office at the end of 6 months. So then if a client ever showed up unexpectedly, at least we were in an office.
Yeah.
Which back then you needed to be. Now, obviously, we're in a different world. People are working remotely, but back then it was expected.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So you got to fake it till you make it a little bit.
You do.
Unless they actually knock on the door, right?
Yeah, and you
can't
just
fake
do
it.
the best you can, and you just say, oh my gosh, so great to meet you, and here's your project.
Yeah, I love it. So it sounds like, how many no's do you think you got before you got your first yes? 19,000?
And as you know, they were no's. Yes, they were. They just were ignoring us, right? Which is what people do. But yes, it was a crazy number to get that first project. Maybe 10,000 letters went out. And then it gets easier after everyone, because, it gets easier because it does. But and then there's repeat business, because when we're dealing with big companies, that's what happens. And I mentioned this project, and I think this is actually an important project. It's an important way of looking at an early client. When we were still in that dorm room, got a project from a big mining company called Cypress Mining. And they called up and they said, okay, we have a document. We need it translated from English into Russian. And it's about a mine in Russia for a joint venture. And the project was only a page and a half. And I thought, okay, we'll do it. It was very technical. We'll do it. Did it. And it was very difficult. We needed people who had their PhD in geology who are native Russian speakers. So we kind of scanned the globe, finding the right people to do it. Did it. Delivered this tiny job back, and it was a minimum charge, and it was a lot of effort for this tiny job, but thought, okay, we're going to say yes, and we're going to spoil the client with the best quality out there. This is very technical. We're going to get it right. Had it translated, edited, proofread, which is how we did everything. And then the client came back to us and said, actually, that was a test, and you passed. And there was a great quality translation, and now we have a big project for you related to a joint venture. And that was our first big project. I mean, I don't remember the exact dollar value of it, something in the neighborhood of $30,000, but that was a lot better than the $150,000 we charged for that first project. Yeah. And that got us out of the dorm room. So then they ended up becoming a big client. And, so the point is spoiling that early client with the tiny job with quality and service can then that client can turn into a multi-million-dollar client, which is what they ultimately did.
Gosh, I love that. That is a fantastic story. Just in a lot of things, right? A lot of humility, right? You can't ever be too good, right? So that this is too small for us, right?
Yeah. Can I just tell you one thing?
Please.
We learned about some of our competitors and why I think we were able to grow and become the world's largest language solutions company is some of them would say things like, well, we don't work with clients unless they give us at least $150,000 worth of business in a year. And we didn't take that attitude because often they will start small. They'll start with a couple $100 project. I mean, translations can be very expensive, but they might be testing you out. And
right.
And we if they were a company that had the potential for a lot of business, we took everything. And then we worked with some smaller and medium-sized companies too. It's just eventually they couldn't pay our rates, over time. But the point is, we didn't have those kind of rules because, often clients will want to test you out and they're not going to guarantee you, $150,000 without having worked with you,
right.
nor should they. So.
Yeah, that is really, really insightful. Well, so look, I don't want to spend too much time on this particular part of your story, but no, it's fascinating and I love it and I think it's really helpful. But I'm really, really curious about what's your message. What was your pitch, right? So you got a hold of a client that says, "What? We've been using this other translation company for 10 years. Why would I switch to you?" I'm curious, sort of how you.
That's a
sort
great
of won yep. your business.
Yes, and that happened. And I will give you another example of the way we got a big client that way, because again, it's from a story, something that happened to us. Okay, we wanted to work with Goldman Sachs. They were, the creme de la creme. Everybody wanted to work with Goldman Sachs. And we were pitching them with our letters and our phone calls, first the phone call, then the letter. And they weren't giving us business. And they did work with another translation company and they were happy. And then what happened is a couple of years into our business, I had been working and my partner had been working crazy hours. And we were going to take 2 days off starting on Christmas Eve, the day before Christmas Eve day, and go to Vermont and see family. Right as we were walking out the door on Christmas Eve, Goldman called up and said, "Hi, we have some translation work for a huge joint venture we're doing in Mexico. And our normal translation company is closed for the week starting now between Christmas and New Year's. And so are you available to do it?" And we thought, oh God, this is finally our break. But this is our way to bring in Goldman. So said, absolutely. We'll be right down, because they actually wanted us to do it at their office because it involved managing the project from their office. So we went downtown on Christmas Eve, pulled an all-nighter, stayed the night at Goldman Sachs because that's what they needed for this job. It needed to be done there, working with a few of their people who were still in the office and getting the work out to translators and getting it edited and proofread and all of that. So basically spent Christmas Eve and Christmas Eve day in Goldman Sachs. And after that, they became a multi-million-dollar client. So that's an example of a client that had been working with someone for years. And that's how we got in. And one of the things I say to people is the way to be successful as an entrepreneur or as an employee is show up when others won't, do what others don't, and show up when others won't. Because that's what we did, and it paid off. So that's one example. I mean, there were other examples of how we brought in business. I mean, we have a lot of stories like that where a client would have a rush job and we would finish it at 3 a.m. And a lot of companies would have said, well, we're going to need a few days, and we would do it in less than a day, finish it at 3 a.m, and then deliver it to their office. We did this with a lot of law firms. So turnaround time was one big advantage we could offer, big differentiator. Another was, so did a lot of rush jobs in the early days, and law firms wanted that, and they were willing to pay for it. Okay, so turnaround time was key. Providing different deliverables that other companies wouldn't, that was key. Making sure everything was translated, edited, and proofread, and of the highest quality. 3 rounds. Quality control between the between the translation, editing, proofreading. That was key. And then
free revisions.
For revisions.
Free revisions.
Free revisions. Oh, that's interesting. It depended on the situation. That's a great question.
Well, I just meant in terms of, you mentioned that the where you worked before, you didn't think that it was fair. If the translator made a mistake, that you were charging the client. So I just meant if a mistake was made, you would fix it for free.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, there's something called author's alterations that I was thinking of when you said revisions, which is when the client, after you've translated, is changing the original that it was. And then it's like, well, probably not. But yes,
right.
We made the mistake. Absolutely. So it was, better quality with more rounds of quality control. It was better turnaround times. It was whatever deliverable they needed. And then we really, over time, we tried different things, and we had a budget to do other things later on, whether it was VIP client events and that type of thing. But the other big piece of it is innovation. We were continually innovating. And I think that's so important because, as you said before, Brandon, things change and your business plan needs to change. But industries change. Technology came in and we needed to be cutting edge on the technology and offering what others weren't. And we were. And then we also started some new products and related lines of business based on client needs, which were part of our innovations that our competitors were not offering. So, I'm a big believer in constant innovation and coming up with ideas before the client even knows they need them. And that was a big part of what we did that differentiated us as well. So what we worked on doing is bringing in the client, making them loyal to us, and then providing services other than translation. But I guess I'm trying to think of, your original question is, how did we pull people away from the competition? So I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Yeah.
No, that's all right. Look, that's all. It's all fascinating and very helpful. But it sounds to me like and again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you guys we're sort of better than in any of the competition in every area. And it sounds like your pitch may have been, look, just give us a shot and we'll show you. And then, you'll be able to see for yourself. So when the Goldman calls on Christmas Eve, you get a shot, or when somebody else is too busy or won't do it because it isn't enough revenue, then that's when you guys get the opening. And then if you execute, then maybe you've got a customer for life.
Or they do. Yes, exactly. They do. Or we would do it faster than the competition. For example, they would call other companies and they'd say, we have $1 million words, and we need it done in a month. And 1 million words is a lot in a month. And other companies were saying, we can't do it. We need 2 months. We need 3 months or whatever. We'd say, we'll do it. And then we found a way to get it done. So yeah, I mean, all kinds of examples like that. And the last one I'll say is this. We really tried to not merely meet their expectations, but exceed them. And, we always talked about that in our initial pitch letter. We will not merely meet your expectations, but we will exceed them and delight you. And then we really did. We acted as though we worked in their company and looked at it from their perspective. If they were sending out an MSA, like a master services agreement to a client and for people to bid on or to compete on, we would give them ideas on the questions to ask so anyway, I mean, all things like that, just providing better service.
Yeah, I love it. Just above and beyond, sort of at every possible step.
Yes.
It's gosh, I mean, it seems to be words to live by. Somebody that's starting a new business, thankful for what you get, and then just try to crush it with every single opportunity, and then it builds on itself, right?
Exactly.
So tell me about you started your business with a partner, right?
Yes.
And did you guys complement each other? Was that, did you do the sales and your partner focus more on the operations, or what was the?
No, that's a good question. No, the answer is I did start with a partner, and I suppose we did complement each other. I mean, we both did a lot of everything, and I mean, I can tell you, what we did wrong as far as how we set up the company, but, I met him in business school. He was a year behind me, and he actually hadn't focused on languages, but, he had gone directly from undergrad to business school. I had worked in the industry for 3 years, the translation industry. And when we started, because he was my boyfriend and we were dating, he was finishing his second year of business school and I was finished, and I started working on the company, but we did it together. And I guess what I'd say is, did we complement each other? We had complementary skills, but at the same time, we were both doing everything in the early days. Sales, production, accounting, I mean, everything. Over the years, we basically tried to define our responsibilities, and it was tough. I mean, I can tell you what we did wrong, but, I have recommendations on what people should do differently if they have a partner or partners from what I did. But one thing I will say is we were both incredibly motivated to build the world's largest company in the industry. But over time, our goals, aspirations, and values just kind of completely diverged. And that's when we finally had to separate as business partners.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I've been there, done that. And
it's what usually happens after, many years together.
Yeah, things change. So you guys started in 92. Do you remember, or could you tell the point at which you had, I guess, in theory, achieved your goal of becoming the world's largest language company? Like, were you able, as you guys grew, were you able to sort of pinpoint, this is the year that we passed, that other business in terms of revenue?
So we were watching it every year, and we grew every year, and we grew revenue every year, and we were profitable every year. But the thing that was interesting about our business in the early days, as I said, it was a very fragmented industry, not a lot of moms and pops. And then a few years after we started, other companies came in and they had funding and they grew, and some of them grew by acquisition, whereas we didn't. We grew, they grew by funding, and then the funding funded the acquisitions. We did make some acquisitions, but we did it a little differently. We acquired some tiny companies that were a very small percentage of our revenue, but we got talent and products or services from acquiring them. But the reason I just told you all that was we actually did not become the world's largest company in our industry until we had been in business 25 years. So it
Wow.
took a very long time because these competitors came in, they had outside funding, and they were doing roll-ups. They were acquiring other companies and putting
Right.
them together, whereas that's not how we grew. We grew by
I gotcha.
internal funding. Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
it was a 25-year journey to get there, and it was very exciting.
No,
Yeah.
that's cool. So yeah, that makes sense. So there was some people came in and bought some business after you guys
Right.
got started. But if you sort of organically speaking, if that hadn't happened, it would have been a different ball game.
Yes, and we were
Um,
the most profitable company in the industry years before that. Even though we didn't have as much revenue, because we had to be profitable, whereas some of these others didn't because they were dealing with other people's money. So
right.
yeah, so from a profitability standpoint, we were the largest sooner.
That's cool. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Was there a point as you start growing, as you know well, now you got to have an HR department. Now you got to have a marketing department. You got to have the more. Was there a point as an entrepreneur growing their business that you started to think, "Gosh, this isn't as fun as it was when I first started"?
Yes, absolutely. You're right, because the job changes so much. In the early days, it's you dealing with all the clients, which was my favorite part, being the salesperson. It's solving the client's problems. And then you move into more hiring and dealing with a lot of admin issues, which we had to from day one because we didn't have other people, but it was not as client facing and just a lot of admin issues. And then it becomes, in our case, it was too much of that for me at the end. And I remember at the end, I was getting 5,000 emails a day. Now, most of them were not to me. I was CC'd on, but I had to look at them. A lot of times when you're
Yeah.
CC'd, people think that you're looking and you're approving. And so, yeah, it changes. The job definitely changes over time, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It becomes more about people issues. And people issues can be fun, but they also can be very draining.
Right.
So, it's
Absolutely.
fun working with the people on when things are going well, but it can be challenging too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, look, it's amazing that from, you started in the dorm room and grew to $1 billion business. Congratulations. I think there's not a lot of people that are able to do that, right? So you're obviously extremely talented, and it's fascinating to me. So you mentioned the end, right? You said at the end you're getting 5,000. So at some point you decided you'd had enough. Well, that sounded terrible. I shouldn't put it that way.
That's okay.
At some point you decided that you were going to move on to different things. Is that right? And so
honestly, what happened is after about 20 years in business, before we had reached that 25-year goal that I mentioned, it got very bad between my partner and me after 20 years. So we had to separate as partners, but the company was the most profitable in the industry and it was very successful. This is the important lesson for other people here. Because we started out of the dorm room with no money, really no money, and that's why we're sales from day one. We did not hire an attorney, and we did not have a proper shareholders agreement. We really actually didn't have any shareholders agreement. And as you know, I'm sure, Brandon, the reason you need one is to define roles, responsibilities, what happened, decision-making, dispute resolution, what happens in the event of death, disability, divorce, and if one of you wants out, how the company will be valued.
Right.
Didn't have it. And it wasn't that I didn't think of it along the way, but we could not get one done the whole entire way. And as I mentioned, he was my boyfriend initially, but I guess what I neglected to say is we got engaged and then we broke up after 5 years together as a couple, living together. And at that point, the company was on its way. It was about a $10 million company in revenue, which, as we know, is a very hard place to get. And neither of us wanted to say goodbye to it. So there we were, running the company together, broken up fiancés, with no shareholders agreement. So people must have a shareholders agreement. And the other thing is we were 50-50 owners and there was no clear decision maker. And I
Oh,
recommend everybody, one of you needs to be the decision maker and you want it to be you.
right,
I mean, just because that's part of why you start your own business, you want to make the decisions.
right.
You want to feel like it's your company. And then, okay, but so after 20 years, it was going not well between us. And I realized either I had to buy him out, he had to buy me out, or a third party had to buy us both out. I had to litigate. So I had to sue to make this happen. And I asked for a custodian to be put in place to resolve deadlock in the short term, so to break ties in the short term, and to oversee the sale of the company in the long term, whereby I could buy him out, he could buy me out, or a third party could buy us both out. And finally, after 26 years, I was bought out, and it was a crazy 4 years of litigation and preparing the company for sale and a lot of ridiculousness and shenanigans and drama. And I spent $50 million in legal fees of my own money, but then a lot of heartache, but got through it and sold after 26 years in business and after we had made that goal of becoming the world's largest, and so it was all very exciting. It was a super exciting journey
Wow.
and
Well,
and yes, experience.
so Liz, we should trade notes offline because I've got I went through a very similar experience
Oh, really?
in terms of having interesting experience with a former business partner. So I'd
Ooh, sorry.
love to share. Well, no, I'm sorry that you had to
Oh, thank
go through
you.
yours. So my point in saying that is nothing other than to say, yeah, of course, not exactly, but look, I can empathize, and that can be a very, very emotional, disruptive, just jarring, event, horrible event.
Yeah.
So I feel for you having to go through that, but thankfully it's behind you.
Yeah.
Well, so in answering that question, I was going to ask if you could go back and tell yourself in the dorm room a couple of pieces of advice. What would you tell yourself? But it sounds to me like you sort of just answered that, right? Make sure you have a shareholder agreement. Make sure you have sort of a deadlock provision, 51, or that you have split 5149 or
Yeah.
something to help navigate when you get into rough spots. But did after you went through that and you came out the other end, it's sort of you have a next chapter, right? A next life chapter, and my understanding is you focus a lot on philanthropy since then.
Yes. So, yes.
We'd
Yeah.
love
And
to hear about that,
another thing I'll add, just because I wanted to say something useful, if it could be useful. Yes,
please.
those were two lessons learned, that you just shared from the dorm room about setting up the company differently. But
Yeah,
the other thing is I learned the importance of one-on-one meetings with employees. And I talk about that in my book. But basically, I mean, these are people reporting directly to you as a leader. And then you can also have skip level meetings and do them with people who report to other levels if you have such people. But they were so important because this was how I learned to retain people. Because in the early days, and I didn't talk about it, but I made a lot of mistakes. As I mentioned to you, we would do things other companies wouldn't do. And our poor employees had to pull all-nighters and do crazy things to make them happen. And we lost people. And I learned I needed to have these one-on-one meetings. So the one-on-one meetings, the reason they're so important is, number one, you can talk to the employee about how are they doing? How are they doing personally? Is everything okay? Is there anything, that we can do for them that we need to address? And then also give them feedback on
right.
how they're doing. And then ask for their feedback on me and what I could be doing differently. And then my favorite question of all, what would you do differently if you owned the company or if you ran the company? And, we talked about innovation. What I didn't mention is so many of our great ideas that we implemented as a company were the ideas of our people. And this is often how we got them. So that was another lesson learned that I learned over time from making a lot of mistakes. And, it's a great way to retain people and get great ideas for the company and make the company more successful. So
I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, but sorry, back to the foundation question. Yes, sorry. Basically with TransPerfect, with the translation company, I loved breaking down barriers between cultures. I love languages. I love people from all over the world, different backgrounds, different cultures. And now with the foundation, I'm trying to do the same thing, break down barriers in the world, break down borders between people of different, socioeconomic levels, different backgrounds. So the foundation focuses on helping support women and people from marginalized or diverse populations. And we do it a number of ways. We do it through educational programs, funding scholarships. We do it through helping entrepreneurs and funding their businesses. We do it through public health initiatives and addressing social inequities of health. And then we do a number of other things too, but that's basically the core business. And basically the idea is to give everybody out there a fair chance, because I'm one of the lucky ones. I was born into a family that I described where I was taught the value of hard work, the importance of education, and my parents paid for my education. And not everybody has that opportunity.
Right.
So trying to make it so everybody, regardless of the background they're from and the family they're born into and the zip code they're born into, has the same opportunity.
That's great. I love that.
Thank you.
When you wrote a book too, so I want to make sure that the audience hears about your book. Tell us the title of your book when you finished it, and where interested people can get a copy.
Thank you so much. So it's called Dream Big and Win, Translating Passion into Purpose and Creating a $1 billion Business. And you can get it on Amazon.com or anywhere else, or a number of other places online, or at a number of stores in person, but Amazon.com is the easiest. And I wrote it because it's the book I wished I had had when I started my career and my company, and really the book that I could have used throughout my years of being an entrepreneur. And so that's why I wrote it. And I tried to make it a little more approachable than a lot of business books. I tried to make it very vulnerable, very authentic, and entertaining. And it's kind of a beach read business book. It's a little more my story with the lessons I learned along the way.
I love it. So, and did you finish the book after you sold the?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So I sold in 2018. So it's now actually been 6 years since I sold. Did that for 26 years, sold 6 years ago. And then I just wrote the book in 2022 and then launched it in September of 2023. So it's not been too long yet.
Wow, that's great. Well, I want to try to see what we can do to make sure that everybody that listens to this buys a copy. I know I am, because I think you've got a really, really interesting story, and there's a lot to be learned from anybody, any business, any entrepreneur that builds a company like you have. There's so much to be learned from what you did right, maybe some of the mistakes that you made.
For sure.
So I encourage everybody out there to go buy a copy. I'll let you guys know how it is. But
thank you.
Yes, of course. We're happy to support. Want to make sure that book does well. But I just took a look and realized that I'm stealing your time. I want to be respectful of your time. So I apologize if we're going over. One final question. And then, well, first let me ask this. Is there something that you were hoping that we would talk about, whether it be business or foundation or anything that we haven't spoken about yet?
No, this has been great. No, I appreciate your wonderful, insightful questions, Brandon. And no, this has been terrific, and I've really enjoyed it. So, yeah, I've loved our conversation. Thank you.
Well, gosh, you're a fantastic guest. It's not hard work on my end. But so, final question. I'm curious if you could go back and do it all over again, the exact same way. Would you do it?
Well, the exact same way. No, but I mean that's kind of, some of the lessons I learned that I shared a few in this conversation, and that's what I talk about in my book. I think I try to write the book based on things I did right and the many, many, many things I did wrong. But I'm beyond grateful for my situation in life, because I'm fortunate to be able to do what I want, and what I want is really to help make the world a better place. Before it was about building my dream company. Now I'm trying to do whatever I can to build my dream world. So I'm beyond grateful. I'm so fortunate. But so it's not that I'm not grateful. It's just, now knowing what I know, I might try to do, we did things a little differently, but it was a fabulous ride, and I loved it. And I'm, incredibly fortunate to have had it.
Was writing the book cathartic? I'm curious.
It would. I think it's you kind of, or I was kind of. I didn't say everything I was thinking every moment, quite honestly, because there are a lot of people in your life that you need to worry about offending, or people who are more private than I might be. So I loved the process, and I loved that I got a lot of things out there that I wanted to share. So I guess in some ways, yes. But, who knows? I might write another one at some point that talks about a bunch of other things too, because I wanted to make sure it was helpful to business people. So I talk about a lot of personal things, but then I make it very business focused. And the answer is, to some degree, yes.
Yeah.
But I, it was a learning experience. I'm learning so much about being an author. And boy, I have so much respect for authors now, because, not only do you write the book, but then you become the chief sales officer, chief marketing officer, chief financial officer. And it's like being an entrepreneur all over again. It's launching a business. But I've loved, the best part about writing the book is I get to meet wonderful people like you, smart, motivated, just interesting people like you, really. And I've loved that process. So it's been wonderful. The events have been wonderful, to sell the book. It's been fabulous. Right. So thank you for asking.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Well, I really, really appreciate you giving us so much of your time. I think that you got a fascinating story, and our audience is going to be really interested in this one. So I genuinely appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I so appreciate your having me on, Brandon.
Absolutely. Hope to have you back.
Thank you so much. That would be wonderful.
Thanks, Liz. Don't forget, everybody, you can find Boundary Breakers in a lot of places. You can watch our episodes on the Boundary Breakers YouTube channel, or you can listen to each podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the other major podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.